Alright, so you just watched that video from the History Channel on the Boston Massacre, and it's a pretty well done video. It shows the tension well, it's very factually accurate, and you can feel the tension. It's uncomfortable. It's been over 200 years, and that situation, situations like that are still frequent. Just watch the news. You still have those kind of situations. You're not sure if it's going to be explosive or not, how things are going to go. And just as with modern incidents of civil protest turning violent, there are always more than one version of event, typically two. There's the way it happened, and then the way it is said to have happened. So often the story changes depending on who's telling it. Just switch from one news channel to the other after something like this happens, and you'll get two different versions of events. So in the case of the Boston Massacre, the name tells it all. Colonial leaders elaborated and spread news of the event, their version of it. They basically used it as propaganda. So there's what happened, these British soldiers were really put in harm's way, and you can argue about whether or not they were justified in killing anybody, but I don't think you can argue that they had a right to defend themselves and they were basically under assault. But it was portrayed as the Boston Massacre, like a one-sided event, and the Patriots used it for their cause to drum up support for, anti-British sentiment and the boycotts of British goods. Right here, this engraving by Paul Revere, this silversmith, who would be like the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, you may have heard of. We'll learn about it later. This was spread throughout the colonies to make the British look good, or bad, and the Patriots look good. Now, this propaganda that they spread, news of the event, actually worked in drumming up anti-British support, and the Townshend Acts that we learned about at the end of the last lesson, those series of new taxes, were repealed. So that's twice taxes were repealed because of protests within the colonies. And as a result, the colonists ended their boycott of almost all British goods except tea, which is a nice segue into our next topic. There's Alice in Wonderland. Not that kind of tea party. So the British East India Company was a vital part of the English economy, and it was getting crushed by this colonial boycott of tea. To help out, the company parliament passed what's called the Tea Act, and it actually lowered the cost of tea for colonists, but basically gave total control of the tea market to the East India Company. Basically, if you were in the colonies and you wanted to buy tea, you had to buy it directly from the East India Company. There were no middlemen or anything like that, or competition. The colonists did not really care about the price cut, and basically did not want to be forced to buy tea from the East India Company. At this point, any meddling Britain did in their business was met with vehement opposition. It was so bad that East India ships bringing tea to the colonies were often forced to leave, like this happened in Philadelphia and New York. In the case of the Boston Tea Party, 3 ships were at dock in the harbor, and on one cold December night, the group of the Boston chapter of the Sons of Liberty, all dressed like Indians, kind of poorly, like putting feathers in their hats and stuff, and went out and dumped all the tea into the harbor as an act of protest, and that is called the famous event, the Boston Tea Party. The problem with the Boston Tea Party is it really sort of ticked off Britain, and as a result they passed what they called the Coercive Acts, coercive meaning sort of forcing people to do what you want them to do, but in the colonies and really in the history books they become known as the Intolerable Acts. So Parliament passed those. They were approved by King George III, who was very upset, and they were passed. And the book doesn't go into the full detail of all of them, but here's what I want you to know. The first one was for the whole colonies, and it was called the Quartering Act, and it basically said that you have to allow British soldiers to live in your houses with you. You have to house them. People did not like that at all. That'd be like the government telling you that you have to let soldiers live in your house with you. And you're like, I don't know this guy. Who is this guy? Particularly if you didn't like them. So that was pretty much a strict punishment for all the colonies. And the rest of these are Massachusetts-centric here. No more town hall meetings allowed in Massachusetts. Is actually they're only allowed to have one a year now, so that would make it hard for them to organize any form of resistance if they're not allowed to get up and meet up. Boston Harbor was closed, called a blockade, until the tea that was dumped was paid for. So that wasn't going to happen. And another of the intolerable acts not mentioned in the book is all trials in Massachusetts were sent to England instead of being tried in the colonies, and to be met before a British judge, which means essentially things would be much harsher if for any Massachusetts colonist that was going to trial. So, as you may well imagine, these acts did not go well with the colonists. They were furious, and we're going to learn about it in lesson 3 tomorrow. On the next page, we have a forum, or as we call it in Canvas, a discussion. In the last few lessons, we learned a good deal about the lead-ups to the revolution, sort of a cause-effect relationship that keeps happening, and they all build up to the revolution. Generally, Great Britain would impose some new tax or policy, and it would be met with fierce colonial opposition. What I want you to do today is tell me if you think the colonists were overreacting and or being unreasonable. So here's what I want to see. I want you to post first providing an example. I will post first with an example, and I want you to make a post saying whether or not you thought the colonists were being unreasonable or they were justified in their anger. Then provide 2 events that support your opinion, drawing from either lesson 1 or lesson 2 or both. And this will be worth 10 points. So here's my example. For me, I said, well, I think it's a mix of both, and here's why. And for example, the Sugar Act was actually lowered the tax on molasses, but allowed citizens to seize, or officers to seize goods without going to court. And that's a pretty significant breach of rights, and I go on to elaborate with an example. That'd be like, let's say you illegally downloaded Captain America Civil War on your computer, Xbox, and you were caught, and the government comes and they take your computer or your Xbox, and there's no trial to see whether or not you're guilty. You're just guilty, and then you lose your Xbox forever, and you're never getting it back. Everyone would be very upset. You would burn the country to the ground. On the other hand, let's look at the Tea Act. It actually lowered the cost of tea for colonists, but the stipulation was they pretty much had to buy it from the East India Company, so they're pretty much just mad at being told what to do. I just think tea's not that big of a deal. Okay, it'd be like all the tea disappears except for Giant Eagle brand tea, or I don't know what stores you have out in the Philadelphia area, but that'd be like only one brand existing. But it's cheaper, and it's like, you know what? It's not really that big of a deal. I would think tea is tea, so I think in that case they were overreacting, in my opinion. Now, you're allowed to have any opinion you want, just make sure that you tell me what you think, and then give me 2 events supporting it. So that's your assignment for the day. That's our lesson for the day. Let me know if you need anything, and as always, have a wonderful day.